Späti. I'm joined with Pavlos Roufos, who is a PhD candidate at University Kassel in Kassel, obviously, and obviously, with if anyone's been paying attention to the news, yesterday there was a massive sentencing of Golden Dawn as a party and members of Golden Dawn for crimes that they committed, and we have Pavlos. Your research is about Greece post financial crisis. You have a book written about it as well, and we thought it'd be a good idea to have you on and discuss. Kind of Golden Dawn as this entity and what's so important then about it. So I guess first and foremost, what makes Golden Dawn more? Greece obviously is notorious for having right-wing movements throughout its entire history since the Civil War up until now. But Golden Dawn was a massive organized movement that appeared probably within like the last 2 or 3 decades. So how would you break it down? Since what is Golden Dawn's backstory really?
Right. Well, as you said, there is a history of right-wing and extreme right-wing movements in Greece for a long time. One shouldn't forget that the end of the Second World War meant that the right wing was in charge of Greece and imposed its own kind of form of authoritarian democracy, if we can call it democracy, for a long, long time. And they had a full hegemony. And alongside and inside those parties, there were always extreme right-wing elements that were usually integrated and absorbed by them. Occasionally, they would rise to the surface, as is the case of the military dictatorship, and then they would eventually, more to the background, but always kind of present, and specifically in very particular, geographically particular places of Greece. They always had stronger support. So this is more or less the background where Golden Dawn comes from. Their leader, who was sentenced along with the others yesterday, Michalogliakos, he was actually a close friend and collaborator of the military dictatorship. He was one of the people who created a political formation right after the fall of the dictatorship that supported them. He was actually, in fact, accused of taking part in violent actions. I think he was accused of participating in some bombing campaigns that the right were doing in the kind of difficult years of transition from 1974, when the dictatorship collapsed, all the way to, let's say, 1981, when you have a change of scenery with the election of the PASOK, the kind of social democratic socialist party. This is the moment when things are changing on an official level and widely. It's the moment, let's say, that for the first time in Greek history in the post-war period, the left is more or less recognized as an official force. Until that moment, even until the mid-'80s, we have stories of people in villages, especially in those very right-wing areas, who would be afraid to go to the coffee house in the village square with a left-wing newspaper under their arm. So these kind of situations were very much present. And Michalogliakos comes from this kind of background. In the early 80s, he formed this political formation, which was called Golden Dawn. And it was just a small group, completely marginal group of fascists and Nazis, right? That's maybe something that's quite significant to say from the very start. And it's also something that separates Golden Dawn from other similar kind of movements and tendencies in Europe and the world. They're explicitly Nazi, right? From the very beginning, all their newspapers, their journals, they have Hitler on the cover, they have swastikas, they have Rudolf S., they have, all those, the paraphernalia of Nazi ideology. So they're explicitly Nazi from the beginning. And but there's a small group that is mostly doing their activities are mostly confined to attacking leftists and squatters and people like that. We have to remember that Greece was not a destination for migrants, right? Until the 90s, Greece was a country that sent migrants to other places, and this, of course, changes from the 90s onwards. So most of their attacks were against like leftists and squatters and anarchists.
Of course. Yeah, one thing I wanted to ask too, I think, is the you mentioned how the sense that Golden Dawn is explicitly neo-Nazi. They have, their magazines had, as you mentioned, just explicitly would have swastikas, very proudly open. There's a bunch of pictures of Nikolaos Michaliakos.
Michaloyakos, yeah, it's a hard name.
Yeah. Just adorned completely in like an SS uniform, kind of cosplaying being a Nazi and stuff. But there is kind of this, at least from my research on Greece, I wrote my bachelor thesis about the post-war period of Greece. There was far right fascist tendencies though are like quite normal, as you said, in Greece. So the idea that Golden Dawn would exist then in this kind of milieu of other right-wing movements, but then also simultaneously there is this like rose-colored glasses, obviously, too, from the right of looking at World War II as well. Like that they won't admit that they were like collaborators, this and that, or that they were fascist. But Golden Dawn owns that up entirely. Like I know that I've seen documentaries and stuff where they just kind of show the books that they own and how they're proud that their grandparents were a part of the collaborationist government of Greece as well, which is not a common thing either, really, in Greece too, is that people just openly praising the Nazis and whatnot. So yeah, you mentioned that then Golden Dawn. Oh, sorry, you can continue. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, this is what you described is true, but you have to keep in mind precisely because it is not commonly accepted to be a collaborator of the Nazis. This is one of the reasons, like even amongst the right wing, even amongst the extreme right wing, because extreme right wing in Greece, as in other countries, it takes different forms. So you have a lot of people who are royalists, in favor of the king. You had other people, monarchists. There's a kind of different dimensions, and a lot of them would be explicitly patriotic, right? So they would not support the foreign occupation, obviously, by a foreign country. So that kind of differentiates the neo-Nazi ideology of Golden Dawn precisely because they're the first ones to actually own up to this idea that, no, Hitler was right, and things would have been much better for Greece if we had collaborated more and if Hitler had won. So that's the kind of thing. And that is also what makes them very marginal, right? Because it is simply non-acceptable in the whole wide spectrum of political ideologies of Greece to be actually in favor of such a position. But they kept it low because they kept it amongst themselves. In the 80s and 90s, the Golden Dawn was not being sold, the magazine or the journal was not being sold in the kiosks or the bookshops, right? It was sent by post to subscripted members, and it was very kind of marginal. And one of the reasons was precisely the inability of having a mass appeal in Greece, a country that suffered a lot under the German occupation, the inability of having a mass appeal on the basis that the occupation was actually favorable for Greece.
Yeah.
But it has to do a lot with the anti-communism that's related to it, right? Of
course.
This is one of the reasons that they are talking about the benefits of Hitler.
Yeah. So I guess like that's a perfect kind of thing into my next question of then how did Golden Dawn kind of become more? I mean, at one point they were the third largest party in Greece. So what was then their transformation from being this fringe neo-Nazi organization who openly expressed themselves with swastikas, so on and so forth, praising Rudolf Hess, Adolf Hitler, to then becoming the party that then, becomes quite powerful and becomes an actual political force within Greece. It's no longer this Nazi cosplaying organization with the magazine. They become a political entity.
Well, this is a very interesting question and a long story, so I'm going to try to cut it pretty short.
No problem.
Because I think there is still a lot of research to be done, but that would explain it in full. But we could just say this: until more or less the beginning of the crisis in Greece, right? They remained a marginal group that, as I said, was mostly, its activities consisted mostly of attacking, brutally attacking, violently attacking leftists, anarchist squatters, people like that, and of course migrants after a certain point. These were very significant attacks. So a lot of people, I can say for myself, and I can testify for a whole generation of people, got politicized because of such things. Like a lot of people became actively involved in politics because of things that Golden Dawn did, even though they were marginal. So you had, like in 1991 and 92, a series of attacks and stabbings of people that brought like thousands of people in the streets, and got them in contact with the kind of political activities that would later kind of determine them as well. Apart from the lefties who got attacked and the anarchists who also got attacked, but the difference between the two being that the anarchists actually organized self-defense and they fought back, right? Mm-hmm. Most of the wider political spectrum didn't pay any attention to Golden Dawn at all. Most people would not even have heard of them until the late 2000s and 2010. One of the reasons for that was, of course, that has to be acknowledged again, and it was quite significant in terms of the trial that happened. They had full support from specific departments within the police. Right. So whenever there was a case like that, it was never, it was either not, there was no one was being charged. There were no police arrests. There was nothing happening in that level. So these cases became marginal, and they were often seen as a kind of infighting between, the kind of extreme groups of society. In 2010, that starts to change because you have a crisis which, among other things, creates a serious crisis of legitimacy, right? Crisis of legitimation of all existing kind of mediations, like political parties, trade unions, mass media. Everyone in Greece has this feeling that, the whole world, the consensus upon which Greek society is kind of built and functions is like crumbling. So any kind of, existing mediation, like being a member of a political party, having some kind of clientelist relationship that helps you with your job, being a member of a trade union that gives you some benefits, trusting the mass media, all of that collapses because there's like this onslaught of austerity out of nowhere. And all these political parties, in one way or another, with some few exceptions, they go along for the ride. Because throughout the whole austerity situation in Greece, you had a lot of political parties who would join as coalition partners and, they essentially, facilitate and accelerate austerity. So this is what happens. And even Syriza that became one of those parties. So around that time, you have the initiation that brings Golden Dawn to the foreground is their ability to manipulate a specific situation in a very run-down area of Athens, Agios Panteleimonas, where they decide to set base because they see that there's a kind of an ongoing friction there happening, because Agios Panteleimonas is one of those places that's really run down. It has a lot of refugee population, of course, because it's the cheapest kind of possible way for them to find some kind of housing, and it creates some kind of frictions with some of the local population, right? By no means all of them, but with some. So Golden Dawn takes advantage of that and tries to initiate its own kind of like neo-Nazi, racist kind of activities. And they manage to earn a specific amount of support in that area. And that translates into them getting elected in the municipal council in 2010, right? And from there, they get immediate access to a wider kind of, spectrum of, they get a wider audience because there's cameras there, people who have known them, start talking about, well, the Golden Dawn is very dangerous, blah, blah, blah. And then they see the images of these people with their suits going into the municipal council and supposedly, representing the constituents who have had enough of everything And, you have the occasional Nazi salute and things like that. So it creates a kind of, media likes this kind of spectacular kind of expressions. So they become like bigger. And then you have a whole effort of a certain type of establishment and media and some kind of institutional support to a certain extent as well, which starts working in a way that presents Golden Dawn as something other than a neo-Nazi organization, right? So you have, for the next couple of years, you have a series of like articles like, they're just part of a citizens committee. They're helping out like people. They're helping old ladies who are afraid of crime. They're helping, so this is mechanism that's being run, and it's not by them, right? It's from official, like quite often very mainstream parts of the media or journalists. So this image has been created that they're basically doing social work, right? And in areas that, the official government has abandoned. So that's how they start to get like more and more fiction. But they remain, partly because they're Nazis and they're basically thugs, right? They're no politicians, they're not trained. They retain this kind of aggressive attitude of like, not giving a fuck about anything and being like very much out there. And that attracts a lot of people who are very dissatisfied with the situation, very dissatisfied with the crisis, completely disillusioned about the possibility of like ending austerity. And here come these thugs who say, we're going to beat our way, through this and focus on those who are, like migrants or leftists, all these people who are like standing in the way, and Democrats and liberals and whatever, everyone, the whole corrupt political system, typical like fascist language. We have to keep in mind that most of the people who support them at that point and who continue to support them are already right-wing people. We're not talking about just random apolitical left, whatever, people from all sides of life. It's like they are already right-wing people, and there are people who so far had been accommodated by right-wing parties as they existed, either New Democracy or the more right-wing like Laos or the other extreme right-wing parties that were slightly more respectable and in parliament already in some cases. So they start draining voters away from the right wing, and they manage to present themselves as anti-systemic because they do not act as a systemic party, right? Yeah. They go on with like, they make assault squads, they go on attacking people. They never manage to fully integrate, into the political system. And then this is kind of a key aspect to understand why eventually in 2013, New Democracy decides to start this trial against them. Like, it's one of the key reasons. A lot of the New Democrats, like politicians who are now in government again, they are since yesterday speaking about how this historical moment of the end of the trial and the conviction is because of them, right?
Yeah.
And of course, to a certain extent, there's an element of truth because they started the trial. They started the prosecutions. They brought these 33 different cases and charges to the prosecutor. But the reason why they did it is quite significant. And I think it was pretty obvious. There's like 2 points that I would like to stress. One is that they realized in 2012, Golden Dawn already had 7% of the vote. 7% is a lot. It's more like 400,000 votes.
Yeah.
And as I said, most of these votes would have gone to New Democracy. So in a situation where everyone is struggling to get like ahead of the percentages, they were gaining more and more strength as the time was passing. So one of the elements is that. The other important element, and it's something that I haven't seen discussed a lot around, is that the massive mobilizations against austerity more or less ended in 2012. Between 2010, when you have the beginning of the crisis, and 2012, I would say February, March, you had like more than 18 general strikes. February 2012 is the last general strike you have in Greece. So what you have is like the social movements are receding, right? They have kind of accepted defeat, and everyone is kind of disillusioned and thinking that this is not mass movements and mobilization is not the way to stop austerity. When that happens, A lot of people who have been politicized to the crisis or who have been political even before, activists from the left and anarchists, they turned their attention to Golden Dawn because it has become, there's a kind of like a renewed attention into the anti-fascist movement that was somehow overshadowed by the massive, strikes and riots and protests against austerity. And then when all of that is kind of like the social movements against austerity are kind of receding in the background, anti-fascism becomes like a bigger thing and gets more focus. And then in 2013, you have the assassination of Pavlos Roufos, right? When that happens, there's a real fear in the government that it triggers such a reaction, right, and such a protest. There's immediately a demonstration with, I think, more than 15 or 20,000 people immediately the day after or something around the area where he was murdered. And I think the New Democracy has this real fear that this could ignite a new round of social movements because austerity is continuing. The Troika is kind of still pushing for the imposition of like structural reforms. And even though it's been a year since not much has happened and there's a kind of disillusionment, there's this fear that this is going to trigger a huge kind of backlash. So on the one hand, they think that they're losing votes. They realize that they're losing votes. On the other hand, they're afraid that there's going to be a new explosion of social movement. And I think these are the two key events that force them to say, okay, we've had enough of Golden Dawn. We're going to take them to court and we're going to try to do it as effectively as possible.
Yeah, that was one thing I actually wanted to ask about too, because Golden Dawn had their moment, like you said, in 2013. But we see like the last elections in Greece, which were 2019, Golden Dawn lost a bunch of seats, kicked out of national parliament, and New Democracy ends up as, the clear victor of the last elections in Greece. Some argue, obviously, the failures of Syriza, which are obviously from the start were apparent, but there are, like as you mentioned, there are a few characters just from who have been in New Democracy for a while. I believe he's the current minister of is it Minister of Health or I was thinking Auslandsminister. What's the English word? Foreign Minister.
The Foreign Minister.
Yeah. Who was a book salesman, who sold very questionable books online, not online, on TV, has made quite anti-Semitic statements, and that's just one of. And he was the vice president of the party at one time as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And
he's huge now, but he was a complete fascist.
Yeah, and never left New Democracy. These feelings were already then, like the sentiment of these ultra right-wing tendencies were already ingrained in a party, and I can totally understand them, the perspective of them wanting to come back. And then what Greece is doing currently with the New Democracy government is doing right now is I would say kind of proof of that, is that they just wanted a liberal legitimization of this type of force, and Golden Dawn was preventing that. So like the idea that like for me personally with yesterday was kind of the sense of that I would like to pretend that there's like a new awakening of an anti-fascist attitude within Greece, but simultaneously I don't know, it's like kind of like the sense of this is so deeply ingrained within Greece's right, especially what is I guess I still don't really know how to process this properly is the problem.
Yeah. Well, let me try and kind of like catch that thread that you seem to be saying. Yes, the one element that also explains the decision to go, to charge Golden Dawn and try to like effectively banish them, has to do with the fact that New Democracy was very much concerned about not just voters leaking away, but they were concerned about people like Georgiadis or Makis Voridis, a very important figure. He was also like openly fascist. He was in charge of a political party, in fact, that was created by the dictator Papadopoulos, who was in prison, and he took over leadership when in the 70s. He's a known fascist.
Yeah. New Democracy literally started as a fascist party, as like Greek rallied in the 50s, wasn't it? Or in the 60s? They're the spawn of a weird kind of.
I don't know if the characterization fascist is proper for New Democracy. New Democracy officially with that name was created after the dictatorship.
Yeah.
Before that, it was called ERE. It was a different kind of party. I would call it like authoritarian right. It's kind of a different period and a different. They're very much, pro-West, anti-communist. They oversaw, the complete process of like exiling, imprisoning, even executing like members or suspected members and family members of like communists. So there's definitely a strain of authoritarian right-wing stuff. But fascist is not necessarily. They would, as any other authoritarian right-wing movement, they would have fascistic elements and fascistic expressions, But anyway, let's not get stuck with terminology that much. It's true that there were a lot of people who were openly on the extreme right corner of politics who were either members of the democracy or became eventually, because like the one who is minister now, who used to sell books, that kind of clown, and Voridis, the other people, they were in other parties, and then they joined New Democracy later on during the crisis years. Also an opportunity for like personal advancement, right? You make your career. If you're stuck in a marginal fascist party, you don't have much chance. But now, they're proper ministers.
So selling books these people, to now meeting with, governments across the world.
There's an element of absolute comedy in all these things. If these people were not so dangerous, Georgiades continued to sell his books, and even he sold other random things like, I don't know, not medicine, but like, this weird stuff you get on like late night TV where you wear this kind of like vest that's supposed to increase to improve your blood pressure. He continued doing that even when he was fucking minister, right? I have to be honest, like on a personal level, when that specific person became minister in 2012, that's really one of the reasons that I left Greece. It's like I could not sustain being in a country that has that person as a minister of health, a person who's going to make decisions that are going to affect the lives and the health situation of millions of people for years to come, like in the midst of a crisis. A kind of extreme, complete clown was main minister. So that was itself, quite a shock. Back to Golden Dawn. Yes, these people that were already in New Democracy were already kind of fascist. They had like different party formations. So they had openly extreme right-wing views, but they were not Golden Dawn type neo-Nazis. So
they were the violence and stuff like that was obviously absent for the most part with all these other groups.
Yes. These people are opportunistic. Like they believe in certain things. They're anti-Semitic. They're, of course, like fascist in many of their views. But at the same time, they wanna have like stable income. They wanna have like increase their kind of wealth. You can't do that if you dedicate yourself to going around Athens and chasing like anti-fascists and migrants, right? So there's an element of opportunism in them, but it's also, we have to be honest about it and fair, because we don't gain anything from not being. So they're not neo-Nazis, right?
Yeah,
there are differences between being an authoritarian fascist and being a proper neo-Nazi who adores Hitler and Rudolf Hess. So there were these kind of conflicts, and to the extent that you had these kind of people inside New Democracy, they would draw all the votes of the fascist population. Once you had a party like Golden Dawn, that as soon as it became a party, right, it renounced its kind of Nazism. You couldn't see any swastikas anymore. You would have to dig in to actually find them. Like one of their key members has a swastika tattoo on his shoulder. That became kind of obvious when he went swimming. So there were loads of pictures.
Wasn't it Elias Kassidiaris, the one who slapped the member of the Communist Party on live TV?
Yeah. Kassidiaris, he's the one. He has a swastika, and once they were arrested after the process started in 2013, they found like thousands of documents and pictures of them in, like, as you said, SS uniforms and other kind of Nazi symbols. So it was there, but it was not open, because even they recognize that if you want to be a party and be representative of a wider part of the population of Greece, you just can't do that.
You can't be a neo-Nazi.
Yeah, it doesn't really work, right? So part of their whole campaign, and until this day, is to denounce and reject the idea that the Nazis, which is of course absolute nonsense, and it's good that today everyone can recognize it, because there was this time around 2012-13 where a lot of people were saying, well, we're not Nazis, they're not Nazis, you shouldn't treat them like that. And
that was one of the weirdest things too with them, as well as around that time is they also start trying to attract the diaspora population into their movement as well, with that same thing of that we're trying to defend Greece. We are explicitly not a neo-Nazi movement. We're just a party that cares about Greece. So there's not massive, I guess, but there's a chapter of Golden Dawn in like Australia, if I'm not mistaken, as well, that really bought into this new this new identity that Golden Dawn wasn't this, and they can vote in Greek elections as well too, which is even crazier. And
yeah, I mean, the diaspora of Greeks, I mean, as in many other countries, people who live in different countries but still retain some kind of connection, they tend to be much more sentimental and much more openly nationalist about their identity than these people. I think the same people, if they lived in Greece, they wouldn't have the same kind of attitude. And at the moment, because they don't know, at the end of the day, it doesn't really affect their everyday life, right? It's just like an identity that you carry around, but it doesn't matter so much because your life is somewhere else. It's your social relations are different and so on. And you don't even come across the same kind of arguments or counter arguments that one would find in Greece. But so yeah, Golden Dawn, as soon as they get elected, they get money from the state, obviously, as every party. So they try to use that money in order to, revamp their image and increase their support. And part of that strategy is creating kind of chapters in different countries to show that they have some kind of internationalism. And the main framework within which they do that is to be openly nationalist, right?
Yeah.
Not Nazi, not national socialist, blah, 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 but nationalist. To the extent that the Greek crisis gets translated, like the austerity imposition gets translated by a lot of people as an attack on Greece as a country. So it gets framed within a patriotic sentiment. And for that, the left also has a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people in the left, even like Syriza, but not only Syriza, they framed this austerity position not as part of a mechanism of if you want to call it neoliberalization, or I would say more like an attempt to impose, the kind of the fundamental structure of the Eurozone in countries that were so far in the periphery and who managed to, kind of evade certain of the key aspects of the Maastricht treaties and all that. Mm-hmm. Instead of doing that, this whole austerity mechanism was translated inside Greece and outside sometimes, but inside was most significant, as a specific attack on the nation as such. So when you have that, the only people who are seen to be fighting against austerity, fighting against the crisis, are the ones who declare themselves to represent the true nation. So one part was the Nazis. So their nationalist kind of rhetoric, attracts a lot of people from the right and from the diaspora and whatever, but people who want to frame this, in such a way. And then part of it's from the left, who end up in Syriza. There's a very strong history of, open patriotism in the left in Greece, precisely because it is shaped through things like the Civil War, the Nazi occupation, and da-da-da. So there was almost like, it's not coincidental that these two parties, like the left from Syriza's side and then the far right from the Golden Dawn, became such significant kind of external players during that time, precisely because they managed to frame this not only as a patriotic duty, but also within the context of how do we stop the crisis? We need a strong state that will defend its citizens from the abstract forces of the global economy, right? The Germans, the Eurozone, blah, blah, blah. You need a strong state that, in Syriza's case, is going to, impose some kind of social democratic Keynesian kind of rebalancing. And in Golden Dawn's case, I mean, although we can't really speak of a political program, it would more or less mean, killing all the migrants, jailing all the lefts, and all these corrupt politicians. And, but both of them were kind of framed in this context of like, okay, we need the state to take care of its own citizens. And as soon as you have that, of course, when you have such a formulation, the immediate result is like, so who are the non-citizens, right? Mm-hmm. And in the case of the Nazis, it was obviously the migrants.
Yeah.
And those leftists.
Yeah. That's actually a perfect segue into something, again, like kind of where do we go from here? But the sense that this is a state ruling about Golden Dawn being an illegal, not even a party, criminal organization, this and that and that. And from, I mean, at least my perspective on the left, and I'm assuming yours as well, from the last statement that you made, is that the state can't really do anti-fascism. Like this really, like this is something to see as justice being, Golden Dawn, receiving justice for their crimes, so on and so forth. But the state really can't be the, or courts and whatnot can't be the arbiters of anti-fascism. So what is...
so they can or they can't?
They can't.
Right. Okay.
I at least that's the way that I see it, in the sense of that this decision was made there was a lot of speculation too, because of how deep Golden Dawn's influence is within the state structures, within, some judges, police, obviously, and military. And the reaction, obviously, from the police yesterday, too, on protesters was very apparent to some that, they were quite upset about the decision, possibly, with the brutality against the anti-fascists. So from, a more, I guess, perspective of being less dependent on the state for, anti-fascist rhetoric, what is possibly then the movement forward from here? This is, I would say, it's not wrong, to see this as maybe a good day that these people got justice, but it is still, at the end of the day, Greece is still a right-wing country in their government. The overwhelming majority, as we've kind of seen since the financial crisis, has been teetering on some, as you mentioned, some form of nationalism one way or the other to address the crisis. And what is like, or is this like a form of anti-fascism that we just don't maybe necessarily see every day?
Yeah.
Maybe you can counteract what I even asked or
yeah. No, I would say, if we're honest, I think it is anti-fascism, because anti-fascism is not necessarily, though it has been historically associated with it, is not necessarily something that belongs simply to the left, and even less the radical left. There are significant centrist, liberal, even right-wing people who would call themselves anti-fascist, and in many historical cases they were. So in this case, I would say it is an anti-fascist and pro-democratic kind of decision. Okay. I don't think we can deny that. What that means is something different, but I don't think there's any point in denying that. As I said, the reasons why New Democracy decided to do this charge and attack Golden Dawn in a criminal way are quite specific, but it doesn't mean that they were not, they were not also concerned with issues of fascism, of neo-Nazis in this kind of way. Let me start with somewhere else just to make a few things clear.
Okay,
Golden Dawn was not charged as a political party.
Yeah.
What happened in the trial was something that I think we should acknowledge the contribution from a constitutional professor called Nikos Alivizatos, because he wrote an article in 2013 or 14, before they got arrested, maybe it was even 2012. He wrote an article and said, listen, the only way to defeat Golden Dawn in Greece is to charge them as being a criminal organization, right? Because the constitution does not allow for banning a political party. There is no process to do that. It's considered unconstitutional. You cannot try them in any other different way, but you can try them as a criminal organization, which is basically the part of the law that deals usually with organizations like mafia organizations, right? Mm-hmm. Once you do that, and this was the key thing of the whole trial, and this is the thing that kind of determined the whole trial and the outcome. Once you do that, that means that there's a specific organization that has a specific hierarchy, leadership, position and all that. And if you manage to sustain that charge in court and it gets accepted by the court, that means that the leadership of the organization gets automatically sentenced to, I think it's a minimum of 10 years, up to 15, something like that, if no mitigation is accepted. Blah, blah, blah. Even though you might have no specific proof that these specific leaders had anything to do with the specific criminal activity that's happened. So murder, extortion, they were charged with a whole set of parts of the criminal code. But once you establish that it's a criminal organization, then the leadership that takes up this charge is immediately sentenced, right? And this was, I think, the smartest and the best way of getting them, to face what they faced eventually in the end. So the party still exists, right? There's no way you can abolish that party unless they decide to dissolve it by themselves. And it's something that happened like today, and I want to mention it because it's kind of interesting, is that there was a change in the penal law 2 years ago by Syriza itself. And this change today means that even the Golden Dawn members that are going to get sentenced and sent to jail do not get deprived of their political rights, which means that these people could run for elections again, even from inside prison, right?
Oh, wow.
It's kind of a peculiar situation.
Yeah.
And this is something that was changed by Syriza two years ago. The Minister of Justice of Syriza, who changed that, today resigned from the Central Committee of Syriza for that reason, right? Although it's kind of peculiar because he was the one who brought it in Parliament and brought it, so he could have resigned back then. Resigning now is kind of obviously suspicious. But in any case, this is the law at the moment. And it's kind of a weird situation because it means these people could get sentenced. And it looks like that doesn't mean the end of their political, activity.
Yeah, that was something I was just thinking of as well, is that then what Golden Dawn as an organization is having a hefty amount of people going to jail, as you said, could potentially continue their movement from jail as well. What does exactly what does this look like then within the sphere of how Greece is today? Does this mean anything? Will this re-empower Golden Dawn? It is kind of the massive anti-establishment thing from people on the right to maybe see them as being these unjustly charged for. I mean, obviously they were charged on counts of murder and gun possession and stuff like that, very bad things, obviously.
Yeah.
Some people could twist that. I mean, I'm just thinking of the context of how, in the United States or in Germany, that solidifies that anti-establishment take, is that you've literally gone to jail because the establishment sees you in this sense, it sees you as dangerous.
Well, I mean, this is an interesting discussion. I think it's very worth talking about it, especially in relation to what happens in other countries or what might happen in the future. Because I think, in a certain way, the conclusion about whether such a criminal investigation makes martyrs out of these Nazis has already, to a certain extent, been resolved in Greece, and the answer is no, because as we said, the criminal charges against them started in 2013. So already back then, this is 7 years ago, right? Actually, they started 5.5 years ago, but the process was initiated. The trial started 5.5 years ago. The process was initiated immediately after Christos was murdered, right? Back then, there was a lot of people who were saying, no, this is going to make them stronger. This is exactly what you said. This is going to prove that they're anti-systemic, the establishment is after them. But that's not really what happened, right? That's not what happened. Because one of the key things about the Golden Dawn organization that has to do with its structure, its kind of criminal background and the way it understood itself and the kind of the principle of the leader that leads everything, is this. And this is quite important, and it came out in the trial as well, and it's quite significant about the result. Whenever anyone from Golden Dawn, any member, was accused of some criminal activity in the past, from the 90s until today, the party immediately denounced them and abandoned them.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to make sure that they had they wanted to retain the good relationships they had with the police, and they wanted to make sure, especially the leader, that he never gets affected by anything like that, because he was never personally involved. Of course, he's an old fat guy. He wouldn't be, he wouldn't be the one in the assault squads, right? Mm-hmm. So he always wanted to make sure that he protects himself from it. So whenever anyone did anything like that, they immediately abandoned him and denounced him and pretended they had nothing to do with him. This has happened repeatedly over the years. This was a way for them to protect themselves, right? And especially the leadership from any kind of possible troubles with the law. But it also meant that the loyalty you get from members is going to be diminished. Yeah. Because if you are a hardcore, dedicated member of Golden Dawn and you go out and you attack and you stab people and you end up in jail and then you get abandoned by your own group, you're not going to be very fucking, happy about that. This is exactly what happened when they were arrested in 2013-14. Loads and loads of members of theirs turned like prosecution witnesses because precisely they knew and they felt that immediately they're going to be abandoned. So there's this tendency, and I think it exists in many right-wing, extreme right-wing movements, that in order to retain some sort of semblance of respectability and law-abiding kind of patriotic concern, they need to always kind of like filter out those elements that are the most kind of extreme or that get caught as being most extreme. Yeah. And that essentially means in the end that the kind of support and the social support is going to diminish because you get people involved in something that, you get them engaged in violent activities, you get them, dedicating their lives into something, and then you immediately abandon them. And that's just not going to look good for you. And that's what happened in the case. Some of the witnesses that turned against Golden Dawn, or they were like members, they were very crucial for managing to get this, the kind of inside look at the structure of, and how it was organized and how you could prove beyond any evidence that this was a criminal organization. Mm-hmm. A lot of these witnesses were quite crucial. And the fact that there were so many of them was quite significant. I mean, we're talking about 69 defendants in the case. Their witnesses were also like around 68, 69 defense witnesses. Although initially they had declared about 260 witnesses. We're gonna support them in court. In the end, it was only about 70 who testified, and most of them were their fucking relatives, right? The mother, the grandmother, just trying to create this idea that we're all looking good, and these are nice people. So basically, we have to admit that this specific way of dealing with Nazi organizations was quite effective. Because it also took advantage of the internal contradictions that exist in an organization that is between the law, in between kind of law and illegality. When they have this structure that they continuously, pretend that they don't know any of their members who get arrested, that's going to bite them in the ass in the end. And that was like one of the things that happened. It was quite significant. So it worked. And, they managed to get like, the really bad sentences. We don't know exactly yet what's going to happen because I think the decision of how many years each one of them is going to spend is coming out now in the next few hours or something. I'm not exactly sure when. So we don't know what's going to happen. But I think it's pretty safe to say that at least the leadership is going to get quite a few years. The 7 people who have been accused of being part of the hierarchical organization and at the top of the scale, or the top of the ladder, they're going to get quite a few years in sentencing. And of course, anyone else who was found guilty for criminal, severe criminal activities, like the person who murdered Fisas and the support group and all these people. So they're gonna hear a lot of that. What's going to happen in the end? It's kind of unclear. I mean, there is some speculation that there might be a new law introduced now that would say that any party that has been found to be a criminal organization can not run for elections anymore. There is no such law at the moment because it doesn't happen very often. But there's some speculation that there might be something like that just to make sure that they stay out. But okay, sorry, I drifted apart a bit. Back to your question.
No, it's perfectly fine. Actually, there's this one other thing that then I just wanted to kind of point out too, is that then that is something that then is really interesting with Germany, is a similar thing was done to try to ban the NPD a few years ago, and failed entirely because they didn't have enough political influence. And I'm just kind of curious in the sense of that. What could then I don't know. It's just kind of like what could then come of then also this trial as well within then other European countries that maybe have a problem like this, with how to maybe like the state also then dealing with it as well.
Well, I mean, I would say what the case of Greece shows is that if there is a political will to do it, and the circumstances are there, and they take advantage of it, as they did, for their own reasons, there are ways to do it. So, for example, in Greece, as I said, the constitution does not allow banning a political party, but, you could try them as a criminal organization. They did, and it worked. Similarly, in Germany, I think the constitution does allow for there is this kind of concept of militant democracy, which means anyone who is against democracy can be banned, and they have banned Nazi parties in the past, and the Communist Party, of course. That's how they did it. So they have the right to do it, but they're not. And I think there's been various attempts in the past to ban the NPD and other similar kind of neo-Nazi formations, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. To be honest, if I may, I would say that the biggest problem, like the biggest neo-Nazi problem or extreme right-wing problem in Germany, is not located in the NPD.
Oh no, of course not.
we have a whole series of ever emergent cases of networks of Nazis within police departments, within the military forces.
Our listeners are very aware of that. I think our last 3 or 4 episodes have been about these networks of neo-Nazis in Germany specifically.
And as I'm sure you've always also commented on, it's been treated as if each one of this is like an isolated case instead of representing something deeper and a very potentially dangerous problem with Germany. I would say still, of course, the history of Germany is specific. It weighs a lot about on these considerations. But I would definitely say that if there was the political will and the necessity, maybe at some point, to deal with them in a different way, all the legal instruments are there. I don't think there's anything that has to be added or taken out in order to do, if somebody wants to deal with it legally. But we shouldn't forget one other thing, which is another lesson from Greece. When as I'm sure most people have already seen by now, when the decision was going to be taken in court yesterday, there was about 40,000 people demonstrating outside.
Yeah.
This is quite significant. Throughout the whole trial, there was a dedicated, small but dedicated group of people who followed the trial on a daily basis, made reports, made sure that there was a proper, coordinated effort to support the lawyers and the legal teams. There was a very significant support. And the fact that in December 2019, the state prosecutor suggested that there is not enough evidence to find Golden Dawn as a criminal organization, right? So there was a tendency for the state prosecution itself to kind of destroy the whole case, the whole framework within which they're based. I think it's quite significant to note that the tremendous pressure from below, the fact that you have a court case being announced and you have 40,000 people outside, that's quite significant. If you had a similar thing outside the NSU case, for example, if you had 40,000 people there demonstrating, I think the results would have been different. There would have been, a different kind of pressure to look into, all these, wider connections that this phenomena have, and not simply remain with this kind of ridiculous idea of isolated cases. Unfortunately, it seems that, in Germany, you do not yet, have this kind of tendency. And I think one of the reasons is that the state mechanism is really concerned that if it starts digging, where is it going to stop?
Yeah.
Right? I think that's one of their concerns that keeps them from treating those cases. I mean,
you mean to tell me that organizations that may or may not have been founded by ex-SS officers will have Nazi tendencies? Sounds a little far-fetched to me.
I mean, any kind of quick look at any of those cases that has come out in the last few years, from the NSU to the assassination of Lübke in Kassel like 2 years ago, to all these networks, it's just like you scratch a little bit in the surface, and it's just like phenomenal how much stuff you find in there, right? And it's like, for me, like coming from a different country, like being in Germany and watching this, the kind of, unfold in front of me, I really don't get it. I do not understand. For me, I have like questions like, how is it possible that a top member of the CDU, of the ruling party, gets assassinated in his garden, right?
Yeah.
On a Saturday night, and the prime minister does not even make a statement about it for a month? How are these things even possible, right? It's just like, coming from somewhere else, it's just like incomprehensible. But, it is what it is. And this is the situation we're in. Maybe the case of Greece is going to trigger some kind of like wider responses. I mean, I read in The Guardian yesterday that it might actually be historically true that the Greek case was the first ever large-scale Nazi kind of criminal case after Nuremberg in the whole world, because of the amount of of the defendants and the amount of and the kind of very prominent ideological aspect of it. It marks something, and despite the fact, this is another thing I want to say, despite the fact that the right-wing government in Greece at the moment is trying to gain credit for it, I think the consequences of having such a historical kind of decision are far beyond what they could use for their own political purposes. I think there is something significant about that. Again, in conjunction with the fact that there was a very wide movement, pressuring from below to make sure that this is going to be the result and not something else.
Yeah, I remember even seeing the Twitter site, Twitter pages like Golden Dawn Watch and stuff like that popping up every single day,
they're the ones,
in multiple languages, letting you know then what was going on. And I mean,
absolutely
phenomenal,
amazing work. The last point I would say, maybe the one thing to keep in mind, which makes it different or makes it kind of less easy to draw like really positive conclusions or positive things about other neo-Nazi or far-right movements that, as you said, like increasing everywhere. One of the reasons that it was possible to try Golden Dawn as a criminal organization and to find them one is because they were a criminal organization, right? They were not a party that was like also, some of its members got involved. They were a proper criminal organization. This is not always the case, right?
Yeah.
You have a lot of far-right movements that are basically, they don't have assault squads, they don't go around stabbing people, but their message is very much similar. The kind of understanding of the world and the way they position themselves in it are very similar. So the fact that Golden Dawn was such a stupidly, created criminal organization, because they were also involved in extortions, there was some kind of illegal activities, of other types, whatever. It made it easier, to deal with them on a legal basis. And you cannot simply kind of, extrapolate that example and use it in other countries, precisely because many of those far-right movements that are emerging in other places, not always, some of them are, right? But a lot of them are not. They are proper political parties and, with a far-right ideology, and disgusting in their own sense. But, so it wouldn't be possible to do a similar thing. I couldn't imagine the AfD ever being brought.
Yeah, no, of course not. Neither could I. That was actually the first thing that went in my head of, it'll never work for a party like them. They're not enough of thugs in the AfD. But I wanted to just once again thank you so much, Pavlos, for coming on. Where can our listeners find you? Anything that you want to promote?
Well, I mean, I'm on Twitter, and I wrote this book, as you said, and people can find information on Twitter about it. I wrote this book a couple of years ago. It was published about the Greek crisis and the social movements that emerged against it, and the eventual defeat of it. It's not a very happy read, but I would recommend it if people want to get a clear idea of what happened in Greece.
Okay,
what's the book called? I do start. It's called "A Happy Future is a Thing of the Past."
At least let you know that it's not a happy book. So
Yeah, it's not, but it's a happy future is a thing of the past on the Greek crisis and other disasters. That's the subtitle. And yeah, I'm on Twitter on at P Roufos, Roufos. I've got a Twitter account so people can
check you out. Awesome. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks a lot for inviting me, and
Thank you for coming
I enjoy
on.
the talk. Yeah.